And we are live. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, welcome friends to Crime and Punishment, the Bulletin edition. This is the new format we are doing. We're also trying this on Twitter Spaces today. Today's little episode is going to focus on Zelensky. Zelensky banning the Orthodox Church and its implications in international law and in America. So, I'd go first to the New York Times article. Actually, no, let's go first to the video of Zelensky himself talking about how he's going to do this. Now, I don't know if you can hear this on the thing or not. In fact, let's just leave it on mute, and I'll just read what he's saying. A meeting of the NSDC, the National Security Defense Council, was held today. This is December 2nd, I think. A meeting at which we examined numerous facts of the ties of certain religious circles in Ukraine with the aggressor state. Obviously, by that he means Russia. It is necessary to create such conditions in which any figures dependent on the aggressor country, that is Russia, will not be able to manipulate Ukrainians and weaken Ukraine from within. You can imagine him saying that about Catholics. You can imagine Trump or Bush saying that about Muslims, right? And you can imagine how up in arms everyone would be. The NSDC instructed the government to submit to the Verkhovna Rada a bill on the impossibility of the activities of religious organizations affiliated with the centers of influence in the Russian Federation in Ukraine. So they are passing a bill, I forget the number of the bill, but it's a draft bill that will basically ban the Orthodox Church. In addition, the State Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience has been instructed to ensure the religious studies examination of the statute on the management of the UCC of a church canonical connection with the Moscow Patriarchate, and, if necessary, apply the measures provided by law. So, you're going to have a religious examination that's illegal, at least for public office here in the United States. But you can imagine the outcry if this were not Ukraine, and if it were not the Orthodox Church. If it were Muslims in America, for instance, and the president said, we are drafting a bill that will outlaw mosques in this country because they are connected to whoever, I don't know, the caliphate, ISIS, whatever it is, however reasonable it might sound, you can guarantee the New York Times would be all over it. And that the media would be pushing for impeachment of whatever president that was. Zelensky, however, gets invited to speak at Congress. And speaking of the New York Times, our article today, Zelensky proposes barring Orthodox Church that answers to Moscow. Now that's interesting. New York Times headline, they have to add that in there, that answers to Moscow. The headline isn't Zelensky proposes barring Orthodox Church, which is what it should probably read, because that's such an extreme thing to do that no one else in the world could get away with it, right? And imagine if Trump barred the Orthodox Church, or, Macron banned the Catholic Church, which is not out of the realm of possibility these days. That would be the headline. But that answers to Moscow. Oh, well, all right, well, they're tied to Russia. I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, imagine if a Protestant, or the way things are going, a Muslim or Jewish president here in the United States were to say, we are going to bar all Catholic churches that answer to Rome, which is what the European powers were doing, and which is why JFK had such a hard time. Well, was it hard? Which is why he had to combat that, the title of being Catholic when he ran for president, is because everybody knew Catholics answer to the Vatican. So, will you put America first, Mr. Kennedy, or are you going to be bowing to Rome? Remember the gangs of New York? Your Roman popery, right? What they're saying, the New York Times that is, and Zelensky, is Well, these Orthodox priests answer to Moscow. They are the enemy. They are answering to an aggressor nation. They are weakening us from within. You heard it in his address from Zelensky's mouth. So, interesting headline, just right off the bat. President Zelensky of Ukraine called for lawmakers to prevent the branch of Orthodox Christianity that answers to Moscow from operating in Ukraine, taking aim at a powerful cultural force that Ukrainian officials accuse of abetting the Russian invasion. In fact, you don't have to imagine the outcry. Remember the U.S. Supreme Court case of Korematsu, where it was World War II. The Japanese on the West Coast were all put in internment camps. Our, American whitewashed way of saying concentration camps. We put the Japanese in concentration camps here in America in World War II. Korematsu sued. They were saying you can't do this to Americans. Supreme Court said, yes, we can. It was a time of war. People forget that there were Japanese folks on the coast in California giving signals to Japanese ships off the coast. Morse code, things like that. They were, cooperating with Japan, Imperial Japan at the time during World War II. Japan did invade Alaska. They landed in the Aleutian Islands. They were planning an invasion of America. It's not crazy to say Japanese nationals here may be spies and may take the side of Japan. How is that an insane thing to say? But you can see the outcry. Korematsu is the most horrible opinion ever. Well, maybe not ever, but it was certainly an atrocious, embarrassing chapter in American history. How dare we treat the the Japanese like this? Meanwhile, there were Japanese nationals answering to Japan. It's obviously. Just like we're shocked when we find out that Chinese nationals working at Harvard or Silicon Valley or wherever they are reporting back to China and the government that they were spies here all along. Of course they are. That's the way of the world. But we are outraged, at least the media is, every single time that someone tries to make a measure against it. But when Zelensky says that the church, the Orthodox Church that's been there for 2,000 years, they are undermining the war efforts of Ukraine because they answer to Moscow. It's tied to Moscow. Well, of course it is. That's just national security, and Zelensky's a hero, and he's fighting for democracy against the existential enemy of democracy in the West, and so on and so forth. Well, so let's see how the New York Times deals with this. His administration will draft a law making it possible for religious organizations affiliated with centers of influence in the Russian Federation to operate in Ukraine, Zelensky said late Thursday in his nightly video address. Again, that's December 2nd. We're late on this news. In addition, he directed the government to conduct an inquiry into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its ties to Moscow, and if necessary, to take measures provided for by law. But he did not elaborate on how a new law would work, whether, for example, the church would be judged as one or parish by parish, and how it would be enforced. Several religious and legal scholars said it could face legal challenges, and without seeing more detail, they were not sure how the government would proceed. Mr. Zelensky's plans may be popular with an increasingly anti-Russian populace after months of Russian bombardment. But they raise hard questions about what it means to be a collaborator in a nation at war, and how a ban on the church would square with freedom of religion under the Ukrainian constitution. That may be the most neutral paragraph I've ever seen in a New York Times article. And for the record, no, I am not paying for a subscription to the New York Times. This is off a website called dnyuz.com that posted it on their own. Neo-Mennonite, what's up, man? Father, husband, homesteader, thank you for joining the Twitter Spaces. This is the first time we're ever using Twitter Spaces. It looks like it's just you and me, buddy. We're just seeing how this goes today. Most of the parties at YouTube. But if you're on YouTube listening to this, the Twitter Spaces will be at Emperor Invictus, of course. For centuries, the ancient Ukrainian branch of the church has been subordinate to the Russian Orthodox Church based in Moscow. The leader of the Russian Church, Patriarch Kirill, has strong ties to President Vladimir Putin, whose long tenure he has called a miracle of God and has endorsed the invasion. Why would an Orthodox priest endorse an invasion by an aggressor nation against these poor, innocent Ukrainians who are just defending democracy and transgenderism and everything else that goes along with democracy? Why would an Orthodox priest do this? And why would Orthodox priests in Ukraine still answer to Moscow after this horrific revelation? But that branch of Orthodoxy, thank God the New York Times points this out, is rapidly losing support, while many Ukrainians now adhere to a newer Orthodox church based in Kiev, created specifically to be independent and not answer to Moscow. A newer Orthodox church, politically subservient to Zelensky. How convenient. Now you've got a patriarch closer to home. You can answer to him. You don't have to answer to those evil Russian Orthodox priests anymore. We've made one for you. Thank God for Zelensky. There is little difference between the two churches in terms of religious practice or doctrine, but the divide between them on Ukraine and its identity relative to Russia is wide and widening. Officials in Russia were quick to condemn Mr. Zelensky's move. The current Ukrainian authorities have openly become enemies of Christ and the Orthodox faith. Dmitry Medvedev, a Russian former president and a top advisor to President Putin, who has described Ukraine's leaders as Nazis and Satanists, wrote on Friday on the Telegram app. A spokesman for the Russian church, Vladimir Legoida, wrote on Telegram that Mr. Zelensky's proposal violated both international law and common sense. Well, of course he would say that. He's Russian, right? Give me a break. Kiev has long worried that Russia is using the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate to provide cover for a network of clandestine agents trying to undermine Ukraine from within. The Ukrainian authorities have said that as of October, 33 priests have been arrested for assisting Russia since the invasion began in February, mostly by funneling information to Moscow's forces. What I don't see in this New York Times article is how their equivalent to the FBI in Ukraine has been placing child porn on those priests' hard drives. I'm sure that's just a conspiracy by Russian bots and right-wing radicals, but I don't see it even disclaimed in the New York Times. The security services have questioned religious leaders and raided monasteries they said were suspected of harboring saboteurs and their gear, though they have not said if any were found, and have interrogated scores of religious leaders. They claim to have found literature that denies the existence of the Ukrainian people, its language, as well as the very right of Ukraine to statehood, and videos have emerged of Orthodox priests chanting pro-Russian slogans. So I've seen, this has been going on all year at this point. Since, February? It's been going on all year, this war that was supposed to be over right quick, right? And I see people on Twitter talking about Russia, pro-Russia this, pro-Russia that, anti-Zelensky this. And for the record, we here at Crime and Punishment, this is a legal podcast. We're talking about international law. This is a criminal defense law firm. We have no political opinions. We're only talking about the law. We're talking about the legal implications of banning a religion in a country, supposedly democratic. We're talking about the implications in international law and in domestic affairs here in the United States when we are supporting a country that would support the church in the Ukraine. I don't say anything about politics, but I see all these people talking about politics on Twitter, saying pro-Russia this, anti-Ukraine that, from a political perspective, not a legal one. And they're just despairing. that no one is coming out to support Russia, or at least to condemn the corruption in the Ukraine. And why isn't anybody speaking up? Why aren't our elected officials doing anything about it? Well, look at what is going on in the Ukraine. Look at what is going on here. It's only a matter of time before we get into this war. I mean, we're openly inviting Zelensky here. President Zelensky, excuse me. I support everybody who's currently in power. I love Big Brother. President Zelensky has been invited here by the people who have power. We have spent $100 billion on giving the Ukrainians money, military weaponry. It's come out that the British have been involved in covert operations over there. Only a matter of time before one of them gets killed and they try to trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Would not be shocking at all to anyone, I don't think, that American soldiers were over there in covert operations, which of course is not being disclosed. And I'm not suggesting that they are. I'm just saying that nobody would be shocked to find out that they were, right? It's only a matter of time before we get drawn into this war. Just like it was only a matter of time before President Roosevelt figured out a way to get us into World War II. And God bless him, he did. And now all the Nazis are dead, thank God. But when that time comes, I don't care who has control of Twitter, whether it's Elon Musk or certain groups of people, whoever it is, all of those tweets will be with the NSA. They will be with the FBI. Certainly be forwarded to whatever military branch for which you are drafted or for which you apply. And they're going to ask you, what did you mean about this tweet where you said we need to support Russia? The time is coming when it will be very real to you. This whole denial of free speech thing. We've been living in this kind of, paradisical bubble since the end of the Cold War, where we can say anything we like. Nothing has really any consequence. We just go to the mall, we watch MTV, do whatever we want. No government's going to come after us. But think about World War I. Think about all the things that Wilson did to silence opposition to the war. Think about World War II and all the people who were ruined when they said we shouldn't be going to war with the Nazis. Or think about Patton being assassinated after saying we need to keep marching straight to Moscow. A time is coming real fast when all these political statements people think are just fun and giggles on Twitter are going to come back on everybody. Food for thought. We here at Crime and Punishment have no political opinions, as I have said the entire time we've been running this program. We're only here to talk about the legal news. The security services have questioned religious leaders and raided monasteries they said were suspected of harboring saboteurs and their gear. But the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has called the accusations of collaboration between its clergy and Russia unproven and groundless. The church formally opposed the war and distanced itself from Moscow earlier this year, but is still under the jurisdiction of Patriarch Kirill in Moscow. Sounding much like Mr. Putin, Kirill has argued that Ukraine is not a truly separate nation, that Russia has a legitimate claim on lands beyond its borders, and that the invasion is a justified defense against Western liberalism. In Moscow on Friday, he spoke of Donbas, the partly Russian-occupied region of Ukraine where the war for control still rages. Today, he says, Donbas is the front line of defense of the Russian world. And the Russian world is not only Russia, it is everywhere where people who were brought up in the traditions of orthodoxy and in the traditions of Russian morality live. You could say the same thing about Christendom, or in older days, Catholicism, specifically. In fact, we have heard that for centuries. and millennia. And here we are, this age-old question once again, of people in power explicitly persecuting the church and saying it's because of treason. I've been recommending the HBO show with Jon Snow. I cannot remember his real name to save my life. It's Gunpowder. It's about the Guy Fawkes plot. Remember the 5th of November. And you see the English government couching everything in terms of treason. These people, these Catholics, they're not, doing the Lord's work. They're treasonous. They answer to Rome. They must all be executed. Mass is banned. The sacraments are banned. King Henry is now the head of the Church of England, and any Catholics who participate in the Mass will be killed. Any Catholics who bring in priests and hide them will be killed. Obviously, all priests caught in the land will be killed. They're all traitors who answer to Rome. This question never dies. And it's amazing that we get to see this in our lifetime. The question is, how soon will we see it in America? Right now, it's over there. It's in the Ukraine. I have no plans on going to the Ukraine. Do you? Was that ever on your tourism bucket list? We're not going to Ukraine. But it's coming here. And we're being signaled that. They're explicitly signaling this when they invite Zelensky to Congress. And they say everything he does, and remember, this is right after he banned the Orthodox Church in the Ukraine. Everything that guy is doing, we support that in America. It's a signal that this is what we want in America, we the people in power. In his overnight address, Mr. Zelensky drew a parallel between the church split and Ukraine breaking away from the Soviet Union in 1991 and its continuing struggle to be free of Moscow's control. Ukrainians will never again be gears of some empires, he said, and added, "We will never allow anyone to build an empire inside the Ukrainian soul." Certainly not the Americans, right? Ukraine's constitution guarantees the right to freedom of personal philosophy and religion, including the right to perform alone or collectively and without constraint religious rites and ceremonial rituals and to conduct religious activity. But it also allows for restriction on that right in the interest of protecting public order. We don't have that in the Constitution. They do, explicitly. However, we do have 2 centuries of case law with the United States Supreme Court, 2 centuries of federal law, federal appellate law, that I think would support this. Whatever regime comes to power probably won't be Biden. He's on his way out. But whatever regime comes to power that wants to execute this here in America, they will find the Supreme Court precedent for persecuting the church here. They will find that it is in the interest of protecting public order. And look back to that paragraph preceding where President Zelensky, that is comparing this to the Ukraine breaking away from the Soviet Union in 1991 and continuing struggle to be free of Moscow's control. Is that not what King Henry VIII said? Is that not what every Protestant ruler said about Rome, about breaking free of Rome? The Pope's influence, undue influence that the Pope had over the subjects of England or of Germany or of whatever country was turning Protestant. If Ukraine does outlaw a religious group, it would be among dozens of countries that have done so. But most are authoritarian states that are a far cry from the kind of liberal democracy Ukraine presents itself as being. The list includes Russia, which has proscribed the Jehovah's Witnesses, among others, as extremists. Oh, well, Russia's doing it, so they can't be upset about this. That is a logical fallacy called tu quoque. You too. Right? Well, yeah, Ukraine's doing this and they're professedly liberal Democrats, but Russia did it too. They did it to the Jehovah's Witnesses. To be fair to Russia, Jehovah's Witnesses probably should be banned. But it's not even close. It's not even close. The tu quoque argument, even if that were not a logical fallacy, is so beyond outrageous a comparison. Comparing the Orthodox Church, banned by Zelensky, to the Jehovah's Witnesses, banned by Russia, is just, it's incredible. That's like saying, we just overturned Roe v. Wade. Abortion is outlawed again. But they're still allowing child sacrifice in Carthage. This is horrible. We need to reinstitute abortion. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous comparison. We are not Russia that can just forbid religious organizations, said Ihor Kozlovsky, a theologian at the whatever scientific society, a Ukrainian and American group based in New York. The president's declaration, he said, was meant to send a clear message to the church leadership to decide if they are the church of the Ukrainian people or advocates for the Russian worldview. So, you heard his message. It's very clear it was a message that said you're either with the Ukrainians and our war effort, or you are with the Russians and their war effort. They have politicized the Orthodox Church explicitly. It's no longer a matter of faith. This is a matter of politics. Legally, can they do that? Well, as you heard, the Constitution says you can do whatever you want religiously, private practice, public practice, etc., unless it's in the public interest to not allow you to do that, which is basically saying you actually don't have this right. If it's in the interest of protecting public order, we can ban it anyway. So it's not a right, is it? The government, Mr. Denisenko said, is saying you really need to decide whose side you're on. About 2/3 of Ukrainians identify as Orthodox Christians in public opinion surveys. That figure has not changed much in decades, but the breakdown has, with steadily fewer people stating allegiance to the branch directed by Moscow, a growing number adhering to the independent Ukrainian church, and many calling themselves simply Orthodox, without naming a branch. The shifting allegiances have significantly diminished the flock under the Russian Orthodox umbrella, much of which historically has been in Ukraine. Russians are, on the whole, less likely than Ukrainians to identify as religious and as Orthodox. In 2019, international Orthodox leaders formally recognized the Orthodox Church of Ukraine as independent, a move bitterly opposed by the Russian Church. Thousands of parishes have switched allegiances to the new branch, though thousands more remain loyal to Moscow. Well, thank God the New York Times has pointed that out to us. Yeah, there might be questions about international law. Yeah, they might be persecuting the church and raiding monasteries, their own phrase, by the way. Yeah, this might be completely against the right to religious freedom, and, it's dubious when it comes to the Ukrainian constitution, but look at all these thousands of parishes that have switched allegiances to the new branch. Orthodox people don't care. They don't want their, fellow priests answering to Moscow anyway. So religious freedom be damned. These people answer to Moscow, and none of us like it. None of the Orthodox likes it. So this is a good thing. In April, a survey found that 74% of Ukrainians wanted the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to cut its ties with Russia, and 51% wanted that church banned. These are probably the same statisticians who find that the majority of Catholics in this country actually support abortion. Catholics love abortion. Abortion on demand, abortion day, night, and noon and evening, abortion at supper time. Catholics love abortion. Look at these statistics. Those same statisticians have found that 74% of Ukrainians wanted the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to cut its ties with Russia anyway. They don't care about the law or the Constitution or international law or anything of the sort. 51% of those Ukrainians in the Orthodox Church wanted that church banned. So they don't care about their own constitution. They don't care about their own religious freedom. All they care about is those people answer to Moscow. And how do we know that? Obviously, the Ukrainian newspapers told us so. The Orthodox churches in both countries share the same religious rituals, abide by the same creed, and trace their origins to the same event in 988 AD in Kievan Rus, the East Slavic state that both Russia and Ukraine consider the root of their modern countries. In that year, Grand Prince Vladimir, to Russians, of Kiev, a pagan, converted to Orthodox Christianity. That is the end of our article. That was a very long episode. I did not mean it to go that long, but what an interesting article, and what a time it is to be alive. So, until next time, everybody.